Okay, so let's go through a little bit of some housekeeping. Everyone is in listen-only mode, and during the webinar, you can type in a question and submit it at any time in the questions box. There's also, you should see the handouts box, and there's a handout of this presentation. I will send everyone who is registered for this a recording of the webinar and the handouts. Okay, so a little bit about Texas Homeless Network. We are providing solutions to end homelessness in Texas communities through education, resources, and advocacy. We have our statewide conferences. I'm sure many of you have been to them. And we also work one-on-one with communities. We have our resources through sharing news, data, and best practices from around the state and nationally. And then we're working on advocacy as TCFV is currently with the 85th legislative session starting. So just to let you know, there's an upcoming series of discussions that we're hosting with Texas Veterans Commission, and it's a Facebook Live event for to discuss veterans and homelessness. I will also send this email in, or this information in the follow-up email. And if you're interested in attending and receiving more information, you can fill out that WUFU form. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to first introduce Krista and Makisha, and they are with Texas Council on Family Violence, or TCFV. So Krista Delgado is a policy manager at TCFV. Her work focuses on researching, analyzing, and promoting laws, policies, and options that expand the critical social safety nets for survivors of family violence, with a particular focus on health, immigration remedies, child welfare, and economic stability. Krista has been working within the domestic violence and sexual assault movement since 1994. And Makisha Hooper serves as Family Violence Services Manager at the Texas Council on Family Violence, where she provides capacity building support to family violence programs and monitoring and technical assistance to battering intervention programs. She supports the Shelter Environment Project by providing training on creating emotional safety, conflict resolution, and responding to survivors' needs regarding mental health and trauma. So I'm going to turn it over to them. And as I said, please make sure that you type in your questions, and we'll get to as many as possible. Any that we can't get to, we will answer those offline and send those out.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. We're really happy to spend this time with all of you today. This is Makisha, and we wanted to start by just sharing a little bit about how we've come to the point where we think about the intersection of wellness and the work that we do with domestic violence survivors. I was fortunate enough to start working with the National Domestic Violence Hotline about 12 years ago when they received a grant to implement a wellness program. So for almost the entirety of my career working with domestic violence survivors, I've been a part of an organization that really was thoughtful and intentional about staff wellness and self-care. As I was a member of management there, a lot of the work that we did was creating a culture of wellness and self-care that promoted staff wellness and self-care and resiliency in the face of exposure to trauma. So I feel really fortunate that I had that opportunity, and I'm looking forward to just sharing some of the things that I've learned along the way because of that.
Good morning, and thank you for being on this webinar. This is Krista Delgado. I might have met some of you at previous Texas Homeless Network conferences. I think one of the reasons why Jennifer reached out to me to do this webinar is because I'm also a yoga teacher, and so you might have ever practiced yoga with me at one of the THN conferences. And I wanted to just put that out there because that's a way that I incorporate wellness into my life. But we want to be very clear on this webinar that this is an opportunity for you all to explore and contemplate what tactics and strategies mean wellness for you. So it doesn't have to be what it looks like when you sort of see a self-care poster or something else, but we want to really help you all to explore some of those different strategies. I also wanted just to highlight the reason for the title, A Pocket Mirror for Heroes. It's actually the name of a text that was written by a Spanish Jesuit priest named Baltasar Gracian. He was a philosopher and a priest in the 16th century, and he actually created this very brief book, and the reason why it's called A Pocket Mirror is because it's so brief. It's really supposed to be sort of just a very easily accessible tool of a text that's aspirational, really on being a hero. And when Makisha and I were approached to do this webinar and we started talking and planning, I was reminded of this text that I had read before. And I wanted just to, I thought it might be a good way to frame the discussion, that we're just providing a very brief overview of just treetops, but hopefully it'll inspire and motivate y'all to get involved in terms of your own personal wellness and that of your organization. One of the quotes from the Pocket Mirror for Heroes that I just wanted to share was that wit, wisdom, courage, elegance, grace, humility, spontaneity. These are all the qualities needed to reach heroism in any occupation. And certainly wellness and self-care is a huge component to achieving some of those qualities. So before we get started into the technical information that we intend to share, I wanted to take 30 seconds to just breathe. And hopefully this won't be too hokey for y'all, but if you could just, where you are, if you're sitting or standing, just making sure that your legs are not crossed, that both feet are on the floor, that you feel the energy from your legs going down into your feet, and you sit up so you feel all of your weight from your torso going down into your chair. Uncross your arms, and just for 30 seconds, we're just going to breathe. All right, that was 30 seconds. Please continue to breathe throughout the presentation, but we'll have another opportunity to breathe sort of with mindfulness and silence again towards the end. But I wanted to start that way because it tends to be remarkable that when we just pause for very small amounts of time and just give ourselves some quietness and some focus and really focus on breathing, how immediately relaxing and rejuvenating that can be. And that's 30 seconds. And so even with the type of work that you all do and that we do that is very demanding, there still are oftentimes 30 seconds that we could have to pause before we move forward. And so in terms of what we're going to talk about today, we're going to explore really what we mean by wellness and why it's important. We're going to discuss the impacts of secondary trauma, compassion fatigue, and burnout, and what this means both for you personally, but also for the organizations and for the work that you're doing, as well as the how to intentionally sort of move forward in holistically prioritizing your own self-care and well-being. And one of the really great aspects of the Texas Homeless Network bringing this topic forward to particularly homeless service providers is that anytime you're doing this high-stress work with a vulnerable population, it requires such an attention to detail and such an extreme presence of mind to do so effectively and to really do right by the populations that we're trying to serve. And that attention to detail and that presence of mind isn't just something that just comes to people naturally. It's something that has to be cultivated and practiced, and that through our wellness techniques that hopefully we can continue to have that as we do work, so that not only are our lives not diminished and sort of our energy taken away from the work we do, but we're rejuvenated by the practices that we incorporate into our lives and work, but also the lives of the people that you work with and touch are going to be enhanced in the same way. We're going to be talking about this from a wellness lens. If we're talking about wellness, we don't want to start from a place of deficit and what we're all doing wrong. It's a paradigm shift into really thinking about, instead of thinking about what you don't do or what you feel like you should do, think about where you want to go, how you want to feel, how you want your organization's culture to be, how you want to be providing the services that you do, and then thinking about the types of resiliency skills and personal skills that are going to be required in order to get to that place, and how can really institutionalizing wellness efforts both in your own personal life and within your agencies, those can be achieved.
Just surprised myself by, I think I opened the wrong PowerPoint. But this is definitely what we wanted to talk about. I think sometimes wellness, thinking about your own wellness and self-care can feel selfish, or it can feel secondary to the importance of the work that we're doing. But in fact, as Krista said, it's very integral to sustaining that work, and to also prioritizing just you being able to show up to the rest of your life as a whole person who deserves to have rich relationships and rich experiences, and managing the trauma exposure is an important part of being able to maintain that balance between doing important work and maintaining your own well-being. We know that all of us engaged in social justice and social change work recognize that we're not going to remedy the issues that we're working on in the short term, that we have to commit to work over a generation, over the span of our careers. And in order to sustain that, we really have to prioritize balancing our own well-being with that work. So I'm just going to assume that most of us aren't in the work that we're doing, and especially those of you in homeless services and housing services aren't in it for the money and the glory. Most of us are doing helping work because we really care. We want to empower others. We want to seek justice on behalf of others. So that lends itself to us becoming kind of focused on the enormity of the social issues and the challenges that we face, even becoming overwhelmed or sometimes feeling hopeless at the largeness of the task. And I think what's really important to remember is that to keep doing that work, to sustain the work, we have to prioritize our well-being. We have to, there are lots of expressions for it. Fill up your cup so that you can give to others, or put your own oxygen mask on first before you can help the others around you. But remembering that this is what comes first in order to sustain that work is important. And throughout this presentation, I'll be referencing the work of Laura Vandernaet-Lipsky a few times. She has done a lot of work on the intersection of helping careers and people whose work puts them in exposure to other people's suffering and trauma, and maintaining well-being and self-care and wellness. And I think this quote sums up what the gist of her work really is about, that we have to understand how our work affects us so that we can sustain it. The book Trauma Stewardship is a really great resource, and I think stewardship is a really important concept for us to consider when we're talking about wellness, because we have a responsibility both to ourselves and to the people we work with to be aware of how we're impacted by our work and what we can do to be resilient in the face of challenging work. There are lots of terms for what that impact looks like. compassion fatigue, or vicarious trauma, secondary trauma, burnout. We're not going to spend time today defining each of those. A lot of us get exposed to that terminology in our work and our training. But one concept I heard recently was the person who coined the term burnout was a psychiatrist, Herbert Freudenberger, who was working with people with addiction issues and kind of started thinking about it when he was working with them, and he would watch them kind of staring off in the distance with a cigarette burning out without even like smoking the cigarette. And when later in his career he began to experience exhaustion and lack of motivation and focus, he resonated with that feeling that he had observed so many times and coined the term burnout for those of us in helping professions. I think what we want to spend a little bit of time today is just considering how that shows up individually in each of us. What are the signs and indications that we may be experiencing burnout or compassion fatigue, secondary trauma? And so I wanted to show you some more concepts from the Trauma Stewardship book and from Laura Vandernoot-Lipsky's work. On the screen right now, there's a diagram called a trauma exposure response. And I've highlighted a few of them just in case the screen is small and you can't read all of them. Many of these responses can show up and affect your ability to be present for your clients, as well as your ability to show up and enjoy your own life and connect with the people in your life. The things that can interfere with our ability to actually serve the people that we're committed to serving are an inability to embrace complexity. We'll stop understanding the complex reasons why people make decisions that they make, or an inability to listen will certainly interfere with our ability to understand and offer resources and support. An inability to empathize or a numbing certainly makes much of our work difficult and would directly contradict why we're in this work. In the book Trauma Stewardship, Lipsky describes a reaction that some people have when we're doing helping work and we're faced with the lack of resources and the enormous demand for the services we provide. And she describes this a phenomenon that can happen called service level bureaucracy. And this is when we, in recognizing that there are not enough resources to go around, we start making decisions about who is worthy and who is not. So our rules for services may become more restrictive, or we may be more likely to enforce those rules. We may screen people out of services because we don't want to give services to someone who's not really going to work the system or follow through when there are so many people that need those services. So I think it's really important to think about how our wanting to give and our commitment to helping people, if we don't do that in a way where we are also promoting our own resiliency, can actually cause us to make decisions that limit who we're able to help. Some of the other ways that trauma exposure may show up is with your emotions. So fear, guilt, and anger, these are all normal reactions to situations that we face on any given day. But when they become a pervasive part of our experience or the primary motivator for the decisions that we're making, then it's probably an indication that we're feeling pretty overwhelmed by the work that we're doing. I often think about hypervigilance and how it's affected me, how the trauma that I've witnessed in my work has driven me to pay attention to details. I think with dealing with relationship violence, it's a pretty common thing to notice, and you begin to pay attention to like the subtle red flags that you're seeing around. Last night I was having dinner and I noticed something, like a behavior in front of me that really kind of looked like a red flag to me, but I didn't have enough information to decide if it was a serious situation or not. So what I had to do, knowing that because I've been doing this work for 15 years and because I've heard many of the ways that people can be cruel and disrespectful and coercive and controlling, I'm going to see these things that make me wonder if there's more to the story. But I was having dinner with my family, and I know that this is going to come up for me, so it was an opportunity for me to think, like, this is an impact of my work. What I want to be doing now is enjoying this time with my family. So I'm going to kind of compartmentalize my thoughts on this and come back and re-engage with the people around me, knowing that I can still keep an eye out or still like be prepared to act if I needed to. And then the other thing that I think that's really important to consider and how we're impacted is losing the ability to empathize and needing to numb our emotions, either through addiction or through behaviors that really kind of disconnect us from our feelings. Brene Brown, who's done a lot of work on shame and vulnerability, and I'm sure that you've seen her TED Talks and her books and her other work. But one of the things that really resonates with me, and I try to remind myself, is that you can't numb the difficult feelings, you can't numb the fear and the guilt and the anger without also numbing the joyful feelings. So you can't turn down your ability to feel fear and guilt and anger through, using substances or zoning out and watching TV or whatever it is, and not also kind of turn down your response to the positive emotions in your life, your ability to feel joy and happiness and connection.
And just to sort of branch off of that, there's a great book called Buddha's Brain, and it's really about neuroscience and happiness. And one of the main pieces that has stuck with me from that book is that they describe negative feelings and emotions and thoughts as really sticky. And our brain is just wired so that those types of instances and thoughts stick, while pleasurable and pleasant and happy provoking thoughts are more slippery. So they might last for, you might be pleased by seeing a bird outside your window on a tree, and it'll provoke this feeling of happiness, but unless we really are present with that and really will to maintain that, it'll slip away. But a negative thought has a lot more hooks in our brains. That's just the way our brains are wired. So we actually do have to be really intentional to hold on to present pleasurable moments. And I really liked what Makisha was saying about there's sort of this knee-jerk reaction when you're doing work that can sometimes be very sad and frustrating, to sort of quell, to try to take actions to quell those feelings and those responses. But insofar as taking actions to quell those negative feelings and responses, you're also turning off your ability to be open to the positive things that might be coming through what you're doing as well. And so one of the things that I thought was interesting in doing a little bit more research for this webinar is that there is quite a bit of research and analysis on the impacts of trauma on people that are working in helping professions, and what vicarious trauma can do both physically and mentally and emotionally to people. However, there's far less research on the solutions to that. So we're really sort of in still a new frontier of how do we move forward. We know that this exists, but we don't have a ton of tools at our disposal to plug into our work and to our everyday practices that have been tested and that we know will work for us. So it's sort of up to us to start to individualize those sorts of plans. But it is very important to acknowledge the impacts of trauma that we've seen in our work and in our personal lives throughout our personal histories, and the impact they have on us, because we can't start to work towards feeling better and promoting our own wellness and resilience until we acknowledge the fact that we are affected. And so that brings me to sort of a question that we would like for you all to chat in first, and then we'll explore some different avenues that we've seen in terms of what does it mean to you to be holistic and intentional about self-care and well-being. And you're welcome to chat in your response for yourself, or you can chat in your response for the work that you do or the people that you supervise or your agency. And it's possible you're just mindfully thinking of these things.
So everyone, if you could see the chat section, enter it there. If you can't see the chat, I don't know why, hopefully you've been receiving my chats, then you can put it in the questions box. Okay, so one person, what I find helps me is meditation, which you can find some really good ones on YouTube.
Great. Others?
Knowing the difference between sympathy and empathy.
Great.
I like the concept that self-care is not a to-do list, but rather incorporated into daily work and recreation.
Absolutely. There was a great article, and I was trying to find it, but of course it was one of those things that someone posts on Facebook, and then it's now gone into the ether. But it was talking, it was one of those, it had sort of a really cliche tagline, like self-care isn't what you think. But the thing that I thought was interesting about it was that the author was sort of challenging this idea that anytime somebody talks about self-care or wellness, they're like, take a bubble bath, go shopping, have a margarita, and so these sort of very, which are fine if those could be some pleasant activities that could generate stress relief for you, but that's just a fraction of the component of what self-care and wellness really is. And so she was really proposing that things like keeping your job and paying your bills is self-care. And doing things like, daily hygiene, doing things that maybe you don't want to do. A lot of us, some of us like go to therapy, and it's not really something that we look forward to, but we know it's something that is helpful. So, just like when we sort of tell kids to eat their vegetables, that's part of their wellness and nutrition. They don't necessarily like it from day one. And so I think that we don't want to make self-care seem like an unpleasant thing, but just like the person that just chatted in that it isn't just sort of think about something that makes you happy and like do it once. It's an everyday intentional effort on our part to be well, and that has a variety of facets, including some pleasure-seeking activities. We all need that. But it has sort of this responsibility to ourselves as well, so that we are creating lives that have less chaos and crisis. And so I just think that that's a good thing to think about as well. And as we're doing those things, like going to your job every day, that means that you're going to get paid on a regular basis. That means that you will be able to pay your housing costs and other living costs, that you also acknowledge that you're doing that for yourself. So you are holding yourself as responsible, and you have a responsibility to yourself to create a life that's going to be more peaceful and settled and stable. And so acknowledge yourself for doing those things that you might not see as part of your wellness routine, but certainly are, and then fold in as many more as you can, and that work for you in your life. So in terms of moving on, is the next slide about what? I don't know why mindfulness is this. We'll do that later.
I think that I need to open the other slide. Can you start talking about this?
Oh, sure. Sure. So I'm going to talk a little bit about mindfulness before we go into given components of wellness. And someone mentioned meditation, and meditation is one practice that can assist in cultivating mindfulness, but it's certainly not the only one. And I want to make sure that people don't leave this webinar or just don't leave sort of with the thought of self-care or wellness with the fact that, well, I'm just bad at meditating. I can't sit still and quiet for a minute, so I just suck, so I just won't do anything. Because the way to achieve mindfulness, there's many roads to it, and it's not just through meditation, but meditation is certainly a great practice. One of the big pieces of mindfulness is just acknowledgement and being present. And so like I said, when, sometimes we're thinking about the fact that, trauma is affecting us, that it's okay to feel that effect. If you're sad or something angers you or something really disappoints you, it is absolutely okay to feel that effect. But a piece of mindfulness along with that presence and the acknowledgement is this non-reactivity. And that's the hard part. That's the part that requires ongoing practice and persistence, that we acknowledge and sit with our feelings and emotions that come through, but we don't react to them. And not reacting to them means many things. So it doesn't just mean we don't fly off the handle when someone says something that angers us, right? It also means that we don't internally judge ourselves for having that feeling, right? So really acknowledging what's passing through you, but not reacting to it. Understanding that those are normal feelings, emotions, considerations, but not letting them, not holding on to them, and not giving them a value. And so I think it's much, much more easier said than done. But one of the main things in terms of the research of mindfulness, I'll read a sentence from the study that I highlight there, Mindfulness in Motion, which was an employment mindfulness intervention for workers in intensive care units and in emergency departments. But one of the pieces that it says was that non-reactive awareness of one's effective response to external events is presented as the key to changing one's internal experience of stress. So while it is very difficult to cultivate that non-reactivity, it also is a key component to ameliorating the impact of all the stress that we are seeing and that we are dealing with. And so it will behoove us and our work to really start to try to cultivate that piece. The other piece is that mindfulness, through this research that's linked and in others, has really been found to have increases in both work engagement and resilience, even in the most stressful environments, and a decrease in the levels of depression and anxiety among folks that are in very high stress work environments. And so it is a very simple yet difficult concept, but it is one that is sort of as a cornerstone of wellness and self-care, particularly for those of us that are in these professions. And I encourage you to go to the link at some point, because it's a whole paper is available there for the mindfulness in motion study, and it's a 8-week, 1 hour a week session that is intended and framed that can be done in a work environment that really cultivates this idea of mindfulness, of wellness, as well as culture change in the entire agency, so people feel more heard and like they're part of a team as well.
Okay. So we want to spend some time talking about specific strategies that you could implement into your daily practices. As I mentioned at the beginning, I was fortunate to start working at the National Domestic Violence Hotline when they began working with a psychologist named Martha Ramos-Steffer, who helped to design the wellness program at the hotline. And the emphasis that she put was really on prioritizing 6 areas of wellness, and so I'm sharing those with you now. And I think for each of these, it's really about knowing what you need and then trying to find the opportunity to incorporate those into your schedule and into your day. So when it comes to sleep, I know that if I have 3 or 4 days in a row where I get less than 6 hours of sleep, I'm probably going to have migraines and feel really bad and not be my best. So when I'm really crunched for time and trying to get work done, I still try to make sure I'm getting 6 or 7 hours of sleep. Otherwise, I'm going to be useless by the end of the week.
And one of the biggest sleep advocates these days is Arianna Huffington. She's the founder of the Huffington Post, so you probably have heard her name before. But her latest book is basically all about sleep. I heard her speak 5 years ago, and she was hard-pressed to talk about much more than sleep, because she never did sleep as a young person and even as a parent and running the Huffington Post. And when she started to really enforce for herself 8 hours of sleep a day, and it wasn't something she could do every night, but she made different decisions and choices and prioritized that, she saw life transformation in both her health and also her emotional well-being, and she talks about it all the time. So if you're ever interested in sort of getting more motivated to sleep more, Arianna Huffington's a great voice on that one.
And then the next couple, nutrition, exercise, these are things that we get a lot of messages about and a lot of suggestions about in our society. And I think they are also things that we tend to connect to, like who we should be, what we should be doing, what we should look like, and a lot of negative messages and shame and guilt around not doing enough or eating too much or things like that. But when it comes to thinking about our wellness, we really want to just think about learning about what we need, and being willing to try some new things and incorporate new strategies, but also just being really aware of what fuels us, what sustains our work and our well-being. So when it comes to nutrition and exercise, I mean, these are not thinking about what you should be doing, but thinking about what you can be doing, what helps you feel optimal and able to show up and do your best. The other 3 components, social connection, is really just opportunities to connect with your family, friends, your community, whatever that looks like for you. Spirituality is a really broad term that can mean connecting with your faith practices, meditation or mindfulness practices, or just really being connected to your purpose and what about the work and about the way you live your life is connected to what you believe about your purpose. And stress management is a really big topic that can cover a lot of things. Again, I think meditation can fall under this topic as well. Other things to think about are flow activities, are often stress-reducing activities, so things that you do that you enjoy doing and you lose yourself in them. For me, that's gardening and cooking. I can spend hours there. My mind is just kind of like processing and flowing, and I'm really connected to what I'm doing. And then, other areas, like managing other areas of your life, like we mentioned, financial management earlier, doing things that help you minimize, like Krista said, the chaos and crisis in your life. These, again, what I found is that I can usually skate by if I'm paying attention to one or two of these components, like just get by on a day-to-day basis. But if things get really hard, if I get triggered by some of the work that I'm doing, or if I get really just in a place where I'm having to work a lot, then I need more of these in place in order to get through that without feeling some burnout or some impact from that work. Again, it's just about finding how you can build this in and what works for you.
And I'll just highlight the spirituality and purpose field, because I think that we can't deny that in so many practices and approaches with folks that have had to overcome adversity, that is always an arena that is highlighted as critical. And it's not necessarily religion, but it is this idea of spirituality and purpose in life that is really important to people to come through adversity. And I'm sure that either you all personally or in your families, or particularly with some of the clients that you serve, have seen this as a paramount motivator in helping people to overcome barriers. I certainly saw that a great deal in direct work with survivors that I worked with. And I kind of feel like we should be mindful and have some level of celebration and settlement in the fact that we all are doing amazing and helping work that we should be proud of, and that does have a purpose, and that provides us a sense of purpose. And I think sometimes people that are drawn to these professions tend to be humble and tend to be really altruistic, which is great. But don't undersell yourself. You are doing good work every day. You're doing work that has a true purpose and underlying foundation to better the world. And remind yourself of that. I think sometimes we sort of forget about that in the sort of difficulty that comes with our work, and in just sort of trying to be good and not be overly sort of prideful. But I think it's important, particularly now in times where we might feel increasingly powerless, and feel like, more and more of the rugs are being pulled out from under us, that we are working for a sense of purpose, and that we should hold on to that dearly.
Thank you, Krista. So we also wanted to give you some strategies to think about how you could incorporate some wellness activities into your days at work. So I think it's really important to just be intentional about how you start and end your work day. Doing what you need to do, getting the things that you need to do, whether it's like packing your lunch, getting enough sleep, taking care of some personal business in the morning, or whatever you need to do so that you can show up and be present for the people that you're working with. And then at the end of the day, I think sometimes we tend to just kind of rush through our days and get pulled in different directions, and then rush to the next thing that we're obligated to be at after work, but taking a few moments to really thinking about how you want to end your day as well, so that you can go home and show up for the people in your personal life and show up for yourself. So really good questions to ask yourself as you're thinking about what you can do is just to be thoughtful about what you need to have in place to do your best work. And then think about what helps you switch from work mode to being present for your life outside of work, for your friends and families, for attending to the matters in your personal life. And consider, like, are all of those methods that we use to disconnect from work healthy for us? Are they contributing to our personal long-term well-being, or do we need to make some changes there? And while we're at work, it's really helpful just to think about how it only takes a few moments to kind of switch your energy. So whether that's doing, taking 30 seconds and doing a breathing exercise, or standing up and stretching, taking a walk, eating your lunch away from your desk, which I have a really hard time staying committed to. But any of those things that can really give you a break. And maybe you don't need a break every day, a long lunch away from your desk every day, but you could stand up, walk away from your desk or whatever your work environment is, and do some short and brief stretching. And that can really shift your energy. The other things that we can think about doing are, just have conversations at work about how we support each other and checking in about how we're affected by the work that we're doing. If you're concerned about someone, find ways to talk to them about how they're being affected, what they can do for some self-care. If you're a supervisor, you are probably in a position where you could think about incorporating some short activities into a team meeting, or incorporating a check-in into your supervision with staff about what are things that you're doing to take care of yourself. Have you noticed how this work is affecting you? What kind of support do you need around that? And as Krista said, the work that you all are doing is incredibly important. And at the end of the day, one of the things you can do is focus on what you did well, define success in maybe smaller increments than what we tend to do, and give yourself a pat on the back for what you've done that day. And as you're coming into work and leaving work, really being intentional about how, where your focus is and what you want to do. Being thoughtful about how you use your time away from work. Are you able to disconnect from work completely? I know we all, tend to have email on our phone, and it's even during vacations it can be hard not to check in. But set aside some time that you are going to check out and not think about work, or you're going to engage in some different activities and set aside work for a while. This is another resource that we link to at the end. It's another way to think about the practices that you want to incorporate, and these are mindfulness practices, but different types. So what are some creative things that you can do? I think a lot of us are probably drawn to activist communities too, and so how can we bring mindfulness to those opportunities as well?
Because this is a new year, there's a lot of people that set tons of, or at least one resolution, but a lot of times those resolutions are sort of embedded in guilt and shame, or evoke guilt and shame when we break them on day 2. And so we wanted to offer to you to consider something within the wellness field that we've discussed today that you've thought about that could be a practice, but without the guilt and shame. So minus the should, just in terms of what you might want looking forward into the new year in terms of your most well self. And we want to sort of pivot the idea of a resolution and even practices around self-care and wellness into more motivating pieces as opposed to those shoulds and doing something you don't do, but actually something that you want to do that's motivating for you. And so before we close with our resources, we're going to take another just 30 seconds of breath. Again, uncross your legs, feel your feet on the floor, sit straight in your chairs or stand straight up. So there's a straight line from the crown of your head to your tailbone. And just start to cultivate some mindfulness of your breath as we take this 30 seconds here. So that was a little more than 30 seconds. Keep breathing. But again, we did that at the start and the finish just to highlight that it doesn't take long, and hopefully you noted like that to really reset. I know I used to work with a woman, and her husband had a really high-powered job, and he worked long days. They were Hindus, and she said that every day he came home, he went and meditated for 20 minutes, immediately upon coming home, and then he would sort of greet his family. And in some ways, for a minute when I first heard that, I felt like it sounded kind of selfish, and sort of like leaving the family behind. But I realized that he had recognized that he needed that sort of time, that reset time, and he had that specific practice based on his faith and spirituality that would get him to a point once he was home to really be able to be present with his family for the rest of the evening. And so I really challenge all of us to look for those opportunities and to not judge ourselves as sort of giving ourselves too much, but to give yourself what you need in order to be present and to feel truly well.
There are lots of models out there that you can look at. This model on the screen is from Trauma Stewardship from Laura Vandernoot-Lipsky's work, and it's just another way to consider how you're building balance into your life. But it's really just an opportunity to reflect and think about what works for you, and find the best fit. These are many of the resources that we've referenced during our time with you guys. The one I think that I didn't talk about very much that is a good one for organizations to look at is the ProQual measure, the Professional Quality of Life Assessment. This is something that you can implement at your organizations and kind of do regular assessments, maybe annual assessments or semi-annual assessments, and just see how your staff is doing and reflect on what people might be needing. There are also some helper cards at this website that are another suggestion of 10 things that you can do every day, and some suggestions on how you can reset at the as you come to work and as you leave work. The Joyful Heart Foundation also has some information on vicarious trauma and resources for doing difficult work. So I think we've spent quite a bit of time and gone over, Jennifer. I don't know if we still have time for questions.
Um, yeah, so I think, but this is such an important topic. So thank you guys so much, and everyone, you should be clapping for them at your desk or wherever you are. I do have one question that we didn't, that is a great question that wasn't asked yet. And this person says, I often say that each week I need a bit of rational detachment, which is a fancy way of saying taking a break. How do workers get the organizations that they work for see the value in this? So if you guys have
That is a really good question.
Yeah.
And it really depends on the culture of your organization, I think, and what kind of opportunities you have to talk about and co-create the culture that you want to be working in. I know sometimes it doesn't feel like you have a lot of power and autonomy in creating that culture. So I think having conversations and sharing these resources, sharing the research is really important. And then there are really, there are lots of different things that you could ask for or suggest. Having a space that's dedicated to disconnecting, maybe like engaging people and making some contributions to a break room space that if there is such a space in your office where that could be used individually and a quiet space for a little while. Talking about how you can appreciate each other's work and recognize good work at meetings, or having a board where you celebrate successes and post about things that you appreciate about your coworkers, but just looking for opportunities to share conversations and ask for what you need, and making recommendations that to look to the experts in these areas, the people that are considering the research and leading the way. I think the Procol is a good resource for doing an assessment of an organization and getting an organization to consider how the work is affecting people and helping professions. But I think depending on your organization and the culture, it's a big question that probably needs a lot of support. So, you could definitely feel free to reach out to us, and we'll support you in thinking through it more.
And I think, obviously if you're interested in it, then you're a champion, and find some other champions within your workspace. Sometimes those might be champions within leadership and sometimes not. If you are having a hard time identifying champions in leadership to really see this as a priority, a lot of times, even in the most restrictive of environments, committees work, and they'll allow for committees. So I know that, for instance, I teach yoga at the employee retirement system for the state of Texas, so for bureaucrats that work just north of the Capitol. And they have a wellness committee, and their wellness committee has set up a series of classes that are available at lunchtime and before and after work hours, based on surveys and responses they've heard from the different people on those campuses that they want and need. And so even though I know that probably their cubicles that they go back to or come from and their daily work lives aren't diversified and are very, really stressful and taxing, the agencies have identified, well, we have this committee and we'll let them do this thing. Even the Capitol, the legislature has their own wellness committees on the House and Senate side, and different offices that lead those up. And so sort of starting to think about cultivating your champions and just what you can personally do, and talk to others about doing in your spaces to help make that culture shift.
Maybe some issues. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that's excellent advice, and I like the wellness committee. So sorry, Makisha, go ahead.
there may be some things that you're noticing about your organization that you could connect to wellness. So if you're noticing really high staff turnover or people needing a lot of leave time to recover from illnesses and things like that, you could talk about how wellness can benefit, of focusing some resources or some attention on staff wellness could have some long-term benefits for the organization's stability as well.
Okay, so that was our only question that we didn't get to, and it's 12:31, so we should probably wrap it up. But thank you again, Krista and Makisha. This was excellent. I could attend this every day, so I greatly appreciate you sharing this information. Everyone who's still on the webinar, I will send out a follow-up email with the recording and also the handouts and some of the other things that were referenced in, like the books and the Brene Brown and all that. So thank you again, and we will talk to you soon, hopefully. All right, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.